Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Monday, September 30th. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Coming up, a new rate increase for PG&E customers was approved earlier this month. What does this mean, and could rates ever go down in the future?
We have to fix a broken system where there are no limits to how much PG&E can request.
We'll hear from a ratepayer advocate in just a few minutes, but first, today's headlines. Fresno's deputy police chief is reportedly being considered for a new job in the Bay Area. According to a report from the news website Open Vallejo, Mark Salazar is among 3 finalists being looked at for the police chief position in the city of Vallejo. The other candidates include Vallejo's current interim chief and a former deputy police chief in San Francisco. Valley Democrats eager to avoid a repeat of the 2022 House midterms are going on the offensive. On Saturday, the Dolores Huerta Action Fund was among groups who met at CSU Bakersfield to ramp up enthusiasm in 2 critical House races, the 22nd and the 13th. 94-year-old civil rights leader Dolores Huerta says the changes in the presidential race could give Democrats the edge.
We know that some of the things that have changed is that we have different candidates for the presidency with Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. It sets a whole new light on the election.
Republicans won Valley House races by just a few thousand votes last time around. Groups are especially focused on Latinos and the youth. This weekend, a memorial was unveiled for the victims of a plane crash in the Los Gatos Canyon near Coalinga. The crash happened more than 75 years ago, but as KVPR's Esther Quintanilla reports, it's part of the closure families of the victims never got.
A local band harmonizes to the lyrics of the famous song by Woody Guthrie, Deportee, Plane Wreck at Los Gatos. The song was one of the first to try to remember Mexican laborers who died in a crash aboard a plane bound for a deportation center near the border. But they never reached their destination. For years, names of the deceased were not known until author Tim Hernandez pieced their stories together. Attending the monument unveiling on Saturday were families and relatives of those who died, along with eyewitnesses of the crash, residents of Los Gatos, and some of the Guthrie family. Dozens sang along, wiping tears from their eyes. Luis Carlos Estrada Andrade traveled from Bakersfield. His grandfather, Rosalio Estrada Padilla, was one of the unnamed crash victims. He says since he'd arrived in the U.S., he'd been searching for what happened to his grandfather. Now, Estrada Andrade says he's at peace, knowing his grandfather's story is being told, and he, along with the others, will live on. For KVPR News, I'm Esther Quintanilla.
In rural Tulare County, a solution for homelessness is taking shape. Last week, a 52-unit mobile home park for the chronically homeless was officially opened. Adrienne Hillman is the leader of the nonprofit Salt and Light. She partnered with Visalia's Self-Help Enterprises to build the unique community in Goshen. Hillman says staff will live on site to help residents who've experienced a lot of trauma after years on the streets.
You can throw all the affordable housing dollars at things that you want, but for people who are experiencing chronic homelessness, if we do not provide the care for folks, we're going to continue to have people cycling in and out of homes and units in affordable housing.
The neighborhood village, as it's called, is home to 50 people and is modeled after a similar community in Austin, Texas.
Vice presidential candidates Tim Walz and J.D. Vance are set to face off in their very first debate on Tuesday, October 1st. KVPR will broadcast the debate live on the radio at kvpr.org and on the KVPR app. If you're in Fresno, you can also join us in person for a watch party at Me and Ed's on Tap in the Tower District. The debate starts at 6, but arrive at 5 to get a seat and play some politics-themed trivia. Learn more at kvpr.org/events.
And now to our main story. Earlier this month, PG&E announced another rate increase, which amounts to about $6 more per month for most customers. The price hike was unanimously approved by the California Public Utilities Commission. Customers have already experienced several rate hikes this year. But the question is why? What has caused these increases, and is there any hope that rates will eventually go down? The Utility Reform Network, or TURN, is a nonprofit that's been very critical of PG&E's spending decisions and rate increases. Mark Toney is TURN's executive director. He joined us to discuss the rates and how organizations like his are responding to the latest increase.
There was a small portion of this rate hike that was for repairing storm damage. And that part TURN felt, that's probably reasonable, as long as the Public Utilities Commission does a audit afterwards and make sure that PG&E spends the money how they said they were going to spend it. But the biggest part of this rate increase was PG&E overspending for wildfire safety, such as vegetation management, tree trimming, things like that. They were authorized to spend $4.7 billion, and they actually spent over $9 billion. So that's part of why we have seen so many rate increases.
So there is one factor in that kind of scenario, which is the CPUC, or the California Public Utilities Commission. Can you explain to people who might not know how their role plays into this? PG&E has to ask to be able to make these increases, right?
There are 5 CPUC commissioners. They're appointed by the governor. They are confirmed by the California State Senate. The challenge is that they have not done a very good job holding the line on PG&E expenses. In fact, for this and at least one other of the increases this year, they didn't even vote on it separately. They included it as part of a consent agenda where they vote for 24 items at the same time. TURN is upset about that because we believe that ratepayers deserve an explanation. When it's on the agenda by itself, the commissioners explain their decision. Not when it's lumped in on consent calendar. It makes it feel like it's not important. And I have to tell you, with all the people calling TURN, I know how important every dollar is. And another $6 a month on top of over $40 a month earlier this year, it really adds up.
How normal is it for a utility company to raise rates this many times in a year?
We have to fix a broken system where there are no limits to how much PG&E can request or how many times a year it can come in with increased requests. There are no limits to how much the Public Utilities Commission can grant in increases. And so TURN is fighting for a cap on increases to be no more than the cost of living adjustment that's provided by Social Security on an annual basis. So if Social Security checks go up 3% in a year, 2% in a year, then guess what? Utility bills could never go up more than 2%, 3%, not this double-digit increases year after year after year. And that's why the bills are so sky high.
So if people are struggling to pay their bill, like as you mentioned with this record-breaking heat and the bills are going up, are there resources available to people? What recourse do they have?
There are a few selected resources. Sometimes the community action programs in your local neighborhood will have home energy emergency assistance. Sometimes PG&E has funds for people with back bills. But the bottom line is each one of these is just a temporary Band-Aid. What needs to happen is more and more people need to get involved, need to contact your elected officials, the assembly members, state senators, the governor, and let them know high utility bills is a voting issue for you. Here's what I like to tell people. By the time you hear about a rate increase, because read about it in a newspaper or social media, or maybe you see it on television, it's too late. They've adopted that months ago and they're in implementation stage. The time that your voice makes the most difference is while the policy is still being debated before they reach a decision.
That was my conversation with Mark Toney. He's the executive director of TURN, the Utility Reform Network. We reached out to PG&E and got a written response from their spokesman, Mike Gazda. He told us the company, as a regulated utility, undergoes state and federal oversight. Gazda said PG&E is taking steps to try to limit average annual rate increases to no more than 3% through 2026. And he adds energy prices have gone up in part because the company's done work to make the electric system, quote, stronger and safer to withstand extreme weather and reduce fire risk. In 2023, for example, the company says they restored power to 7 million customers during a record 15 major storms. PG&E also says customers do not pay for fines and lawsuits levied on the company. Those costs are paid out from the company's profits, as required by the state of California. And that does it for today's episode. Thanks for tuning in. If you've got a story idea or feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Just email podcast@kvpr.org. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden and KVPR with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.